So that just gives you a sneak preview of this. That's a 60-minute DVD, and I will leave it with Pastor Ben so that hopefully at some stage you'll be able to enjoy the rest of that DVD. And it goes into some of the amazing ways in which God has blessed the Adventist Church with what is traditionally known as the health message. And that's it's something which has enriched my life, and it's really reinforced my belief that God has called the Adventist people to be part of the work toward the end of time, and they have a special role. And often Adventists call the health message the right arm of the message, because it's one way in which we can demonstrate to the communities where our churches are that we care about them by running health programs, so that they know we care about them, we love them, because they can see we have an interest in their lives. You know, we want them to be better mentally, physically, socially, and spiritually. And so then we can show, like Jesus did with his compassionate ministry, that he really cared for them, and then they are prepared to listen about the greater things of the kingdom, of course. So let's just quickly run through. This is quite a long presentation, so I must not get too distracted, because I know you don't want to miss out on some of these health updates. So God has a dream for me, and Jesus said in John 10:10 that he came that we might have life and live it to the full. So God wants the very best for us, the very best. He's not prepared to give us a half-baked life with lack of vitality, some illness here and there. No, he wants the best for us in every kind of way. And in John 15 we read, he wants our joy to be complete. So he wants us to wake up in the morning and feel great. Yes, another day. Wow, what's God got planned for me today? Where we're really living life, not just sort of limping along, a bit of a cripple in life. No, he wants the best for us. And so when we live according to his plan, then we can take hold of this life that he offers us, and we can live the best. And also, he wants peace for us. Not an agonizing, struggling life with a heart that's half broken. No, he wants to give us this joy and this peace and this energy that only comes from heaven. So the thing is, because God is my creator God, he made me, and so he knows the very thing in my soul that yearns something missing. There's a bit of a God space in my soul, and unless I fill it with God, unless he's there, something's missing. There's something missing in many people's lives. And of course, because we know God knows our needs, God knows my needs more than me. And so, of course, when I trust and I go into partnership with him, then he can really give me that life that he wants me to live. And I know, because he's my creator God, that he can fulfill my needs better than me. And sometimes we think, man, that looks like an interesting thing to do. I want to go after that. Those people seem to be having fun over there. Let me go and join in them. You know, we're seeking happiness, and sometimes we go off on these wild goose chases, and at the end of the day, they can break our heart and ruin our families often. And so the thing is, when we partner with God and we're listening to his little voice in our heart, and we follow his leading, then we can be assured of a great and a rich life. And of course, it's not just about physical health, is it? When we talk about health, sometimes we just think about someone down at the gymnasium, going for a jog in the morning, whatever. No, God wants the best of us in every facet of our life. In New Zealand, there's quite a disparity of longevity, how long people live, both between the males and females, and between the Polynesian population and the non-Polynesian population. But do you know what? There's good news, as you can see on the slide here, that, just trying to find a pointer here, I thought I might have had one. That's looking good. Yeah, you can see here, all of these parallel lines are going up. You know what that means? This is like a 10-year period, nearly a 20-year period, and there's a 5-year increase in longevity expectation. So things are getting better. We are learning some lessons in health, and longevity is one way in which our health, the health of a nation, is reflected. Now, I'm going to present now some research. Some of this research is straight out of medical journals, and some of you have an orientation and an understanding of some of these things. I've brought along a few sample papers. In fact, I've got 2 big plastic bags full of stuff there, and I don't want to take it back to Australia. It was like this coming in, through the airport. Don't want that. Save me from this. Come and talk to me if you want something. And I also have some Ministry of Healing books. I have 6 to give away to you guys today. And I'll take a couple to Hornby this afternoon with me. And so if you want a free Ministry of Healing book, you have to pay for it if you go to the ABC. But if you want a free one, all you have to do is promise me you'll read it by Christmas time and it's yours. But I've got some academic papers as well there. I've got some abstracts and some summary statements from Loma Linda University Vegetarian Conference just from 2013. A lot of health updates there. Fairly technical sort of language and information, but it's very interesting, and it'll give you an update on quite a few important findings and developments in the area of health and diet. Now, this paper, it's about this unusual stuff that's in garlic, and it's also in some other onion-related things, but garlic, it's very strong in garlic. So diallyl sulfide is this special stuff, and they did very good research. And how do I know that? Because it's published in this Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. This is a high-ranking peer-review research paper, and what they found was that this ingredient, diallyl sulfide, was more powerful at a very dilute, at a concentration 136 to 300-fold less than these strong antibiotics, erythromycin, ciprofloxacin. You'd think when you diluted it so much more than these other antibiotics, it wouldn't have the power. But no, 5 hours, it was able to do what these other antibiotics did in greater than 24 hours. So you mightn't like the smell of garlic in the person next door. Don't put up with it. Get your own on board, and you'll knock back some of those winter chills and bugs, because none of us like to have the flu and things like that. Garlic is a great way of knocking back microbes. It's there in the research. It's coming through. And these days of multi-drug resistance, when people are using antibiotics far too much, we'll be looking around a lot more for some of these natural things. You've heard it before, not just a myth. Garlic is great stuff for bugs. Okay, now this is looking at mortality rates in the United States, and what are the things which people are dying on? Well, no surprise there, but 1 in 5 Americans is dying because of smoking, all right? Now, of course, not everyone smokes, so that's a high proportion of the smokers. They're going to die. They're spending their money on killing themselves. And man, why would you want to do that? But still, we get hooked into some of these things when we're younger, and we struggle with them, and it's really hard to get off. One person I know who really struggled to stop, couldn't stop. She tried many times. When she was 60 years of age, she went and saw a cardiologist. She had some heart problems, and she went and had a quadruple bypass. And the doctor said, and the anaesthetist said before, never smoke again. Suddenly, she had the willpower to stop. Funny, isn't it, that she was able to stop then, but she failed many times before. Don't wait. If you're struggling with tobacco, give up. The sooner the better, and you'll have your health for a lot longer. So 1 in 5 Americans die of tobacco, hypertension, high blood pressure, 1 in 6 Americans, overweight, 1 in 10, physical inactivity, being a television couch potato, 1 in 10, high dietary salt, 1 in 20, and some other things in there in order. I didn't work out what percentage of the population. But these are the ranking things in American, and in Western culture, we're not too much different here in Australia and New Zealand. Red meat consumption. This comes from an important peer-reviewed medical science research paper, Archives of Internal Medicine, quite a recent paper, 2002. Fascinating, isn't it? Look, you substitute nuts for meat, and you can lower your mortality, your chances of dying by about 20%. If you substitute red meat for poultry or grains, you can lower your percentage by 14%. Substitute it for fish instead of red meat, 7%. So red meat's not doing so well on this particular paper. Oops, sorry. No, where are we? Did I jump to there? Okay, vegetarian diets and the incidence of cancer in a low-risk population. And there are many studies done about vegetarian, and there's some mixed results, by the way. And sometimes people have a vested interest in publication, and of course the livestock, dairy, and meat industry are very keen to see some research done which makes vegetarianism look pretty sick, and sometimes they're able to manipulate that. Let's just have a look at this one. Vegetarians, the overall risk of cancer here, you can see with the risk ratio is 92, so that means out of 100%, 92. So you've got an 8% lower chance of having cancer overall of all cancers, and cancers of the gastrointestinal system, your risk ratio is 0.76, so nearly 25% less chance of having cancer of the gut. For vegans, these are people who don't have any dairy at all, no eggs as well, and these vegans had a ratio of 84, so that's 16% less chance of having cancer, overall cancer. And what about this? For some specific female cancers like breast cancer, the ratio is down to 66. This means 24%, 25% lower chance of getting cancer. And this is for the lacto-ovo vegetarian people who have eggs, milk, cheese, and eggs, that sort of thing. A 25% lower chance. So the conclusion is vegetarian diets seem to give some protection. And this is from the Cancer Epidemiology Biomarkers, an important peer-reviewed journal as well. Now, what about this one? Type of vegetarian diet, body weight, and prevalence of type 2 diabetes. Of course, type 1 diabetes is often very early occurring in life, and it's insulin managed and not so easily impacted by lifestyle medicine, although certainly a healthy lifestyle does make a difference. Here, we're looking at what happens for vegans and the prevalence. That means how many cases there are over time. And you've got 51, with a risk ratio of 51. That means almost half the cases are missing in vegans. For the lacto-ovo vegetarians, almost exactly the same, 0.54 risk ratio. And the pesco-vegetarians did pretty well as well, 30% down, and semi-vegetarians, these are people who have very small amounts of meats, just use meats as a little bit of a flavouring and not having the huge steaks and things. Also about a 25% drop as well. Very important paper, and a paper which comes from the Diabetes Care journal, and that's a fairly recent paper, 2009. Okay, what about Adventist health? Well, Adventists, as we've just had a look at some of the history, in the very early days, 150 years ago, after a vision that Ellen White had in 1863, had the famous health vision, within a few years, there was a huge institution, and very famous people around the world used to go and stay there to get healthy again. And so we have many, many hospitals. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the Australian Prime Minister and the Australian Federal Minister of Health, they opened the Sydney Adventist Hospital, a whole new wing. And when I was a young man, it was a long time ago. Well, I did my training then and was a nurse for a few years. And so that hospital is probably the premier private hospital in Australia. And of course, we've published a lot of literature, and I've got lots of Adventist published books on health there that I would like to have an opportunity to show you a little bit later, and some of those I'm able to give you. And of course, the food health industry. And anyone here had a Weet-Bix this morning? Look at that. What a man. I had 3 myself. That's why I'm looking so good this morning. Adventist health. This is a statement which captures many of the elements of Adventist health. Pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness. This just means a little bit of self-control and limiting the good things as well as not having the bad things. Rest, exercise, proper diet, and the use of water. That's sometimes hydrotherapy. Like it might be giving your sore ankle a chance to have some hot and cold water in different tubs to make it heal and stuff like that, massage and all those things with water, and trusting in divine power like this. So this gives a balanced, in one statement, captures many of the elements of Adventist health. There have, of course, been many important research papers, and this just gives a few of those. Interesting findings now. We're looking at some of the results of Adventist Health Study number 1 from 76 to 88. And you see here, what you see is the red bar's very big. That's a risk ratio of 1. And then the yellow bar's less. And then the green bar is small. And you can see both the green bars there are around 0.5, close to 0.5. And what that means is people who are having nuts, a handful of nuts several times a week, almost halve their risk of coronary heart disease, CHD, coronary heart disease. You want to have half the risk of heart disease, acute heart disease problems, have a handful of nuts. Have a variety of nuts, not just all peanuts because they're cheaper, but have a variety of nuts, a handful several times a week, and you can halve your risk of coronary heart disease. It's that easy. Believe you me. No one wants a heart attack. Now, what about this one? Now, these 2 slides are some of the most important slides I'll show you this morning, especially this one. Anyone here venture to have a glass of cold water? I know it's very cold here in Christchurch this morning. Some of you have had water. Do you know how many haven't had a shower for a few days? Everyone had a shower for a few days? You wouldn't think of missing out on a shower for a few days, but some people don't like water. They'll drink other things, cup of tea, half full of sugar, whatever, but they're not so keen on water. Put some lime juice or lemon juice in it. Do something to make the water palatable. Even if you cook a broth soup and just don't add salt to it. Whatever it takes to get some water into you. Very important. And I'm showing you 2 things here now. From the Adventist Health Study, we've got this one, which shows, again, that you can pretty much halve your risk of heart attack, coronary heart disease, by having plenty of water. 5 glasses plus per day versus less than 2 glasses a day can halve your chances of having a heart attack. It's that easy. You imagine, how does the body wash on the inside without water? The only way the body can do the good things on the inside is when you give it some washing. We wash the outside. We don't want to smell bad. And we don't want to feel bad. We feel better you feel better when you put water inside as well. And it doesn't have to just be water. You can drink all kinds of things, as we'll see from this next study. This is really interesting. Compare 2 groups of men, those who drank 11 glasses of anything, with those who drank 5 glasses and less than 5 glasses per day of any fluids at all. And the cancer rate for a specific kind of bladder cancer was half in the group who drank 11 glasses of something every day. You want to halve your risk of bladder cancer if you're a man? Drink more. And the same for water. They looked at the same thing, not just all total fluids for the day, but they looked the same for water. And those who drank, what is it here, 6 cups versus those who drank 1 cup, which is, or less than 240 mils a day. And you can see the mils there, it's 1440 versus 240, and that's 6 versus 1 cup. And 0.49 is the risk ratio. That means you can halve your risk of, and so it works out the same whether you look at your total fluid intake or just water. Either way, you can halve the risk there. One's risk ratio is 51.51 and the other one 0.49. So make sure you get at least 5 glasses a day, and a little more is better. In this cooler weather, you probably don't need to pump it up much more than that. But if you're working out in the hot sun and it's summertime and pretty warm, then of course you need to drink more to allow for that. This lady, 112 years old, Seventh-day Adventist lady in America, 112 years of age. Some of these Adventists, they just won't go away. Be one of those. Hang around long enough to upset your great-great-great-grandkids. What about this picture? You see these two old ladies. One's 90 years of age. She's the baby of the family. And there's her mother, 112 years of age, Lydia. Amazing, isn't it? Do you think they're both in a nursing home? Do you think so? No. Marguerite, with her 91-year-old husband, is living with Lydia in the house. Amazing, isn't it? You think you're old when you're 70 or 80? No, you might live for another 30 years. Hang around and upset the neighbours. Why not? What about this Marge Jetton, 101 years of age, she's still driving a car. And Terry Butler, he's one of my mates in Australia, he was the assistant director of this Adventist Health Study too that's still going on in the States. He told me this personally. He said one day, I had to go someplace with Marge Jetton, and he said, and so she was driving. I'm in her car. He said, I'm sitting there, and we're driving along. We come up behind a car in front of us, and she said, do you know what? She said, one thing really annoys me, Terry. What's that, Marge? These slow drivers. 101. I love it. Okay, now I don't have New Zealand on this table. I do apologise for that. I don't know what happens with the Americans. Maybe they just didn't understand down under has a down under. It's even better than the up down under. But look at this. Look at some of these figures. So in Australia, how many men get to age 85? Around 20%. Females do better, as you would expect. Those females, they're stronger, aren't they? They're amazing, these women. And more than twice as many, 38% of women in Australia get to age 85. That's amazing. But what about down here? The Californian vegetarians, this is probably lacto-ovo vegetarians and just a few vegans there, nearly half of the men, look at that, nearly half of the men, 3 times as many as Australia, nearly half of the men get to 85 years of age. That's frightening. You imagine if you're trying to run a pension program for the government. It would just blow them away. And what about the women? 60% of them, nearly 2 out of 3 get to age 85 if you're a Californian Seventh-day Adventist vegetarian. You know, those same things about vegetarians apply to New Zealanders as well. Now, what about diabetes and diet? Do you think diet makes any difference? Well, in the Adventist Health Study 2, they looked at that and they found the vegans did best. Around 2% had diabetes too. Lacto-vegetarians not quite so well, all the way up to non-vegetarians, they did the worst. Around 8%, 4 times as many diabetes 2 people. You know, we think if you have too much sugar, you'll get diabetes. I remember going to have breakfast at my grandparents' place, and they used to have pure glucose. It's a fine white powder. Man, did I love getting more than 1 teaspoon of glucose on my cereal in the morning. And my grandmother, you'll get diabetes, you'll get diabetes. Not so. It's the high fat, especially animal fat, that contributes heavily to diabetes. And of course, once you are a diabetic, you don't want your blood sugar going wild, so then you need to manage your carbohydrate and sugar intake. But look at that. Just shows an amazing difference between a vegan, someone who lives on a plant-based diet entirely, versus people who eat regular meat and everything else. Just an amazing difference in type 2 diabetes. Makes a big difference, doesn't it? What about high blood pressure? You get the same pattern. Look at that. For both Afro-Americans as well as whites, you get the same pattern, with the vegans doing best, low-acto next, etc., up to the meat eaters. So, high blood pressure problems, you do a whole lot better being a vegetarian. What about, how does cancer stack up with poultry versus, it depends on how often you eat it. Well, let's have a look at this, versus rarely red meat. Right, and so these are people who just love chicken, but they don't go so much on the red meat. And look at that. So those who almost never have it or rarely have chicken, they had a much lower risk of colon cancer than those who had it regularly. Okay, now, so in summary, looking at Adventist Health Study 2, the vegetarians had a 15% reduction in mortality compared with non-vegetarians. So that's all causes of death. Yeah. Pesco is someone who has fish. Okay, a pesco vegetarian is someone who doesn't have poultry, doesn't have meat. Thank you for the good question. A pesco vegetarian. And so the pesco vegetarians and vegans did best, and the pesco vegetarians seem to do better than the lovo-acto vegetarians. And so that's just an interesting, something emerged in the Adventist Health Study too. And this is Ellen White's statement in Patriarchs and Prophets. Faith in God's love and overruling providence, it lightens the burdens of anxiety and care. So this is when we know we're not on our own and we put our trust in God looking after us. This makes our life a whole lot better. It fills the heart with joy and contentment for people regardless of their lot in life, whether they're the Prime Minister or they're like me trying to be a health director. It doesn't make any difference. We all feel better when we just trust God and we know He's looking after us. Religion tends to be to directly promote health, lengthen life, and heighten the enjoyment and all the blessings of life. Now, I'm looking here at Adventist Health Study 2 because not only did it look at physical health and diet, but it also looked at perceived mental health. And you can see here one of those lines, unfortunately, doesn't appear very well there. It's down here somewhere. But both Adventists, black and white Adventists in America, they did a whole lot better than the average American because of the fact that they had this trust in God, something outside of themselves. And so Adventist has something special, not just for us and our children and our grandchildren and our friends, but something to be shared with the communities where our churches are. And the scientific evidence really shows the truth of these claims. And the other thing that we need to be aware of, you know how I was saying something like, you'll halve your chances of getting coronary heart disease. You'll halve your chances of getting a special bladder cancer. Well, the thing is, it still means half of those people, or 75% of those people, are still at risk and likely to get those diseases. So it doesn't mean if you do all the right things in life that you're never going to have any of these problems. You just lower your risks. So you shouldn't be blown away if you do all the right things and you still have a heart attack. Like one of my colleagues in Sydney, he's very careful with his diet, he has an exercise program, and he still had a heart attack. Now he's recovered very well, and maybe if he was more careless with his lifestyle, he may not have recovered so well. But still, good, conscientious Adventists who live all the Adventist lifestyle things, still, a lot of them still have problems, depending on what the problem is, of course, what the chances are. So in Romans we read, not to criticize others because they have a different perspective or do something different to us. We need to be welcoming and loving to everyone, and we just need to be self-critical and self-disciplined, and then our example will be a blessing to others. We're not to dictate. I'm not to pull out all my healthy ideas and go bashing other people on the head with it. No, it doesn't work that way. And so we are very fortunate and blessed, and we need to share this good news with other people. Now, how's our time going there? 10 minutes? Okay, I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. This is salt, something we all need. How much is too much? Let's talk about that for a bit. Okay, one of the problems with salt is if we have too much salt, it pushes our blood pressure up, and that increases the chance of our cardiovascular disease. And do you know that in Australia, the amount of salt in a can of vegetables from 1960 up until the present day has almost doubled, because salt tends to make our food tastier. So does fat, and so does sugar. And so the food manufacturers to get the edge, and those making hot dogs and hamburgers, they know that if they make the food a little sweeter, a little fatter and greasier, and a little saltier, it might taste better than the arrival around the corner. And so, unfortunately, they push that limit, and all of us get used to saltier and saltier food until now we're in a situation where we're having 2 to 4 times more salt every day than we need. So let's just have a look at some of this stuff. This is a damaged artery, damaged by too much salt, atherosclerosis being laid down there, and the evidence is strong. And we know, this is a technical report from the World Health Organization, that salt raises the blood pressure and increases our chance of a heart attack. And salt is very important. It's responsible. Cardiovascular diseases are very important. 32% of the cancers caused by cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular diseases, 29%. Hypertension, this comes from the Australian Institute of Health, and we've put in a huge amount of money and investment into managing people's blood pressure with drugs. It's a very expensive exercise, and we've got a huge problem that hasn't gone away, because giving people pills and letting them live the lifestyle that they might choose is not necessarily the best way to go. And so, looking at hypertension and stroke, as your blood pressure, your mean systolic blood pressure, SBP, systolic blood pressure, as it goes higher and higher, the chances of you having a stroke are higher and higher. You know, my dad used to have a high blood pressure. He used to love putting salt on all of his vegetables. Mum would cook with salt, he'd add more salt. We didn't know so much about salt in those days, and my dad he was younger than me, 3 years younger than me. My dad had a stroke. He might have lived to 80 if he hadn't had that problem. Been more careful with his diet. Now, what happens as we start reducing our salt intake? Slowly, our diastolic and systolic blood pressure drops back. How much is too much? Well, the NH&MRC suggests 1,600 milligrams of sodium, which is 4 grams of salt, and with an upper daily limit of 2,300 or 6 grams of salt. Do you know those small packets of long soup, right? You're with me on the same page? Just one packet of long soup. If you have a packet of long soup for lunch, you've already had equivalent or a little more than your daily ration of salt. You have a look on the packets, you'll be amazed. But the food we buy, the processed food, is far too high in salt. And they even put salt in things like chocolate sometimes. Crazy. Why would you imagine they want to do that? But processed food has far too much salt. So generally we should cook with just a tiny pinch of salt or none at all, because we're probably getting more salt than we need from the processed foods we use. Now, this is just looking at specific sodium and salt levels in some of the fast foods, McDonald's, burgers, etc., and just making a comparison and looking at what percentage of your daily target you get from some of these fast foods. And you can see there anything from a quarter as much as you need up to, in the case of KFC, one burger, 1.5 times as much as you should have had for the whole day just from one burger. So you can see that the fast foods, they really do pump up the salt. The thing is, do you think everything we buy in a grocery shop should actually be food? Do you think it should be food? We kind of think, oh, looks like food. It's got a picture of food on the packet. Says, contains real apples. Sounds good, isn't it? Apples over there. No, stay away from that. Buy this packet. It's got a picture because it contains some real apples in here. Man alive, we get taken in by this industry, don't we? And the food they often sell us has a bit of flavoring, a bit of color, might even have a color of an apple. And I eat it, and might taste like an apple, but it's likely to have far too much fat, far too much salt, and far too much sugar. Okay, a little more research. We'll see how far we get through these. Okay, what are the effects, looking at a comparison, if you reduce carbohydrate intake and you reduce the fat intake in a diet? you've probably heard a lot about high-fat weight loss programs around the world, and they've been quite fashionable for the last decade or so. And interestingly, this study, which, by the way, I want to teach you a little bit of epidemiology and medical science today, 119 participants in a 12-month intervention study. This is a low number for a relatively short period, okay? If you want something with more scientific power, you'll have a big number over a long period. And the very best kind of research is the randomized controlled trial. Not the retrospective ones when we look back and say, what did you have for breakfast in 1951? That wouldn't work for some of you because you're probably too young. But that sort of science is not so good. A prospective study is better, where you look today, what did you have for breakfast today? Write that down in your diary. What about tonight, tomorrow, as you go? That's a prospective study. The retrospective ones are least reliable. Then you have the blinded and double-blinded randomized controlled trials. They are the really good sound research, and some of this stuff is based on that. But this is a small study for a limited period, and they found that it was more effective to reduce the carbs you have, carbohydrates, than reducing your fat a little bit. So this lends some support to the idea of the high-fat diets, but it's not particularly a high-fat diet. All it is reducing the fats a bit. So one of the problems with people who have a particularly high protein or a high-fat diet is that the toxic and the challenges for the body to process that into energy it burns dirty, you could say. So carbohydrate is the natural energy food, and it burns clean. And so protein has the same amount of energy per gram as carbohydrate does. Fat and alcohol, they have 7 and 9%, other way around, 9 and 7% per gram by weight. But at the end of the day, they burn dirty. It's not the best way to get our energy intake. And so in this very small, short study with not much research power, reducing your carbohydrates was a little more effective in weight control than was the reducing their fat. Okay, now, we haven't got time to go right through these things, but basically this is a meta-analysis. This is it's a collection of studies, and they looked at 232 research studies, and they looked at what were some of the conclusions they took from all these studies that looked here at a long list of diseases which are diet related, and then they scored these things and ranked them from A to D. And if you look down here, you'll see, here's an A here, let's just see what this is. Oat, barley, and psyllium-based cereals can help lower cholesterol concentrations, and high fiber, wheat-based cereals can improve bowel function. So that statement is highly likely to be true. You know, it takes a lot of research science to be able to really conclusively say this is the case. In the 50s, when they started doing a lot of research on lung cancer and smoking, it took them many years before they were absolutely convinced that was correct, because occasionally you have confounders that trip up your research and you come to some sort of shaky conclusions. And at the end of the day, we have to be cautious in the way we interpret studies. Okay, vegetarian dietary patterns and mortality. This is from Adventist Health Study 2, and this is just looking at total mortality. And the interesting thing is that there are significant associations here between the various different kinds of renal and endocrine mortality rates they drop. And so you can see here that all mortality drop, total mortality. This is the ratio here, 85 less than 1, so that means 50% lower for the vegans, 9% lower for the lacto-vegetarians, 19% lower to pesco-veg, and semi-veg, 0.92. So here, the fish vegetarians, people who are vegetarian except for fish, they did best of all on this particular overall mortality. And it seems to be that there's an association there. So again, cautious language seems to be, rather than saying this is a definitive answer. It's only one study, remember. What about weight loss? Okay, now how much scientific power is there in this paper? Have a look. 359,000 participants for 9.7 years. It's a whole lot stronger than 119 for 12 months, isn't it? You can see. So you're going to listen to the results and conclusions of this study a lot more than you would from the other one. Okay, most important result of the study is the finding not just being overweight, but also the distribution of body fat affects the premature death. So we're looking here at girth measurements around the tummy, the waist, compared with the hip measurements. And I've got some of the original papers there if you want to pick this up. But very important study, and this was made available on public domain because it was such an important finding, and a study with a lot of power, and so they released this quite early. And the fact is that if you're a man, for every 2 inches or 5 centimeters you add to your waistline, you increase your chance of mortality by 17%. If you're a female, for every 2 inches or 5 centimeters around the waist, you increase your chances of dying by 13%. Pretty important finding. What about alcohol and cardiovascular disease? Well, there's a whole lot on alcohol and damage. And again, this is an important study. It's also printed in the British Medical Journal, you can see there. British Medical Journal. And how old is this study? Just came out 2014, quite recent. Now, you've heard that if you have a little alcohol, it can improve your heart health. Have you heard that? Put your hand up if you heard that. Okay, a few people heard that. This study, it's an important study. Look, nearly over 250,000 people, and specifically coronary heart disease and stroke patients. It's a meta-analysis. That means they're looking at 56 individual studies, and they're comparing the results and analysing it and making them into one study. That's a meta-analysis. And this is British Medical Journal, one of the top peer-reviewed journals in the world. And they concluded that this study suggests the reduction in alcohol consumption, even for light to moderate drinkers, is beneficial for cardiovascular health. So this is turning on its head a lot of those studies, many of which may well be sponsored by the alcohol industry, which suggest that a little alcohol is good for the heart. So this is a very important and significant finding. Okay, now I won't go into all of these studies because there's just too many of them, but this one's looking at our psychosocial and cognitive improvements with diet. And so this is looking at flourishing. It's looking at how much meaning there is in life and how curious and creative people can be. And it seems that people who have more of a vegetarian diet, they are better and score higher on these things. Now we're looking here at some of the leading agencies around the world and some of their recommendations for health. So World Cancer Research Foundation, be as lean as possible, be physically active, don't have really rich foods, eat mostly plant-based. If you eat red meat at all, aim for a very small portion, less than 300 grams a week. If you have alcohol at all, no more than 2 glasses if you're a male, or 1 glass of female per day. Now salt, make sure you have less than 2.4 grams, and avoid mold. Any bread that's going moldy, don't eat it. It's not good. It can cause cancer. Supplements, you don't need supplements if your diet's adequate. It's much better to use natural sources of good nutrition in diet rather than having popping pills, vitamin pills or whatever. Women should breastfeed their babies as much as possible. And once people have cancer and they have surgery or something, then they need to be very careful in following all those advices. You've heard of the Mayo Clinic, I'm sure, on reducing cancer. They say no tobacco, have a healthy diet, make sure that you keep your weight good and your exercise, don't get sunburnt too much. Make sure you're immunised for certain types of cancer, avoid unprotected sex, etc., and have regular medical checkups. Now, this just shows the reversibility of damage to the coronary arteries, and this is the actual pictures taken of a doctor's artery when he had a heart attack when he in his 40s, 44-year-old, plant-based diet, and 18 months later, then without cholesterol-lowering drugs, just living a natural and healthy diet, all of a sudden, he changed from this picture, almost totally blocked. You see there, you can hardly see the blood vessel going through, and this is the same vessel 18 months later. Does it work? Can it prevent? Absolutely. Can't always guarantee, but it works enough times to give it a shot. Okay, now this is just an interesting one, because just this week in the British Medical Journal, some more research coming out. So I'm showing you this slide, and I'm going to show you the research. So this is out of T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, a great read if you get a chance. And this just shows that the more milk people have, the more prevalence they have of multiple sclerosis, and also for more milk consumption. There's another one that here, I've actually copied the wrong one into the slide, put a picture out of the China study, which was bone fractures, and it's the same sort of a pattern. The more milk people had in different countries around the world, the more likely they were to have bone fractures. So I apologize for that. World Health Organization, and this is just looking at some of the recommendations. We haven't got time to go through all of these. All right, and again, this is the Center for Disease Control, CDC, Atlanta, Georgia. You probably heard them quoted, especially around Ebola and SARS and some of the worldwide infectious disease problems. These are the recommendations. Underlying risks are tobacco, nutrition, exercise, alcohol, and genome stuff, inheritance. New Zealand Heart Foundation list, it's not too much different actually. If you are struggling with tobacco, don't give up on quitting. Keep quitting, and you get better at the things you do often. So don't say, man, I failed again, I'm just going to keep smoking, I just can't get it. No, keep going. You get better at it, and you become more determined, and you can stop. And especially with God's help, you can do it. Seek help as well, but it's quite possible, and you can avoid all sorts of terrible problems. The health message: pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, trust, exercise, proper diet, use of water, trust in God. These are the true remedies. Amazing. Now, God's dream: to live a holy and a godly life. What does that look like? It looks like all these good things from Exodus 34, where God declared his name to Moses, and in Galatians, the fruits of the Spirit. This is what God... Can we do it on our own? Absolutely not. But when we are one with God, in complete unity with God, living in God and having Jesus living in us, we can accomplish great things, and God's name will be glorified. And so then the world will see and know about our God, and then we've done something wonderful, not just for ourselves, but for God's kingdom, to grow God's kingdom. How good it is. Let's just have a little prayer together to wrap up. Dear God in heaven, what an amazing and wonderful body you've given us. How wonderful is your interest in us. How can you, the God of the universe, have a real, genuine interest in who we are? We're just children, erring, tripping up children, keep making mistakes. But you love us so much. You won't let us go. You pursue us. You want us in your kingdom. And today we say yes to you. Come into our lives and hearts so that we will bring honor to your kingdom. We will glory your mighty name. Thank you for Jesus and everything he's done. And we thank you for the gifts of health. In Jesus' name, amen.